Okay, just a little disclaimer before we get started here. Now, I've had good luck using this method with a relatively inexpensive Weaver button machine. I've made many metal leaf buttons and even fabric buttons without issue. However, your machine may be different and might not work with this method. If you choose to use this method with your button machine, you do so at your own risk. I am not responsible for damage to your machine if you choose to follow this tutorial. If in doubt, you can always press the button first and then apply the metal leaf after. Although, if you go that route, you will need to use a clear oil-based varnish or other material to cover and protect the metal leaf, since it can tarnish when exposed to humidity after a period of time. Also, the metal leaf can wear or flake off if not protected in some way. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's get started. To make a metal flake, or what might be a more apt description, a metal leaf mixed media button, you're going to need a few things. If you're using metal leaf or flakes, you're going to need some kind of gilding or leafing glue. Spray adhesive might be an option, but I haven't tried it, so I can't say if it would work. You're going to need a brush to apply the leafing glue. If you're doing multiple buttons at one time, as I am, you'll want some kind of cup or pot to put the glue in. I just use a little silicone cup. Obviously, you're also going to need some button kits. For this step, we're only going to need the button shells, or the front part of the button. I am using 2¼ inch or 58mm button kits. I get my kits from buttonmakers.net. Now, I'm not affiliated or sponsored by them, but they do sell high quality kits, and I have had excellent customer service from them. I highly recommend them for button supplies. I don't press the buttons together before this step. I'll do that at the end after I've applied the metal leaf and embellishments. Of course, we'll need some metal leaf or flake. The brand and colors are your choice. I found this particular metal flake at a vendor mall where I had a booth at one time. I really like the blue, purple, and bright silver. It's kind of chrome-like flake. I also have some generic metal flakes I picked up from Amazon a while back, and some metal leaf sheets I bought at an art shop. Metal leaf sheets or flakes both work well for this project. If you already have one or the other, don't feel like you need to go out and buy what I am using here. We are also going to need a pair of tweezers. I really wish I had searched my craft room for a better pair, because these really suck and, as you'll see later, gave me some difficulty. We need a brush for applying and burnishing the leaf. Here I have a makeup brush. I also use another small paintbrush for burnishing and lifting off excess flake or leaf. In addition to the preceding, we also need a button press machine, and I'm assuming you have one if you're going to attempt this project. Also, this is completely optional, but you may want a typewriter to type out words or phrases, and maybe some old magazines from which to clip out letters, words, or images. You can also just print out words and phrases with your printer. I just happen to have a typewriter, and I have access to a lot of old magazines. I start by squeezing out some leafing glue into my little cup. The glue is quite thick, and I don't know if that's just the nature of the leafing glue or if mine is a little dried out. This is the only brand of leafing glue that I've ever used, and I've only used it on buttons. I don't think the brand really matters, so if you already have some on hand, that should work. I'm going to load up my brush with some glue. You don't want too much, it's thick, and a little goes a long way on these button shells. I try to get a somewhat thin and even layer on the shell. It doesn't have to be perfect, just try to get it as even as possible and be sure to coat the entire surface of the shell. I also coat the edges, which probably isn't necessary, and it's also a bit messy as it's hard not to get the glue on your hands. I need a better method because my fingers get really sticky. I could probably use some blue tack or a magnet or something to hold them in place while I paint them with glue. Of course, I always think of this after I complete the project. This particular brand of leafing glue claims to have an open time of 24 hours, but I've had buttons that were still tacky and usable after a couple of weeks. If you cover them with like a plastic container as they dry, the glue should stay tacky for well over 24 hours. I can't guarantee that is the case with every brand, but it's been my experience with this brand. These are some gear inclusions I bought for resin projects. I want to test pressing different textures into the glue and see if the texture or design is telegraphed through the metal leaf. I think it will work, as you can see the brush marks in the glue show in the leaf. This is because the brush marks are left in the dried glue. This might be undesirable in some projects, but I like the effect it makes with the metal leaf on these buttons. I'm going to brush on a fairly thick layer of glue, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best idea. The gear inclusions tend to slide around as I put them down and then try to pick them back up with my crappy tweezers. But as you'll see later, the test is successful even if the designs are a bit distorted. I'm already thinking of what other textures I can use. It should be noted, however, that if you use this method, you need to be aware of how thick your glue is, the item that you're pressing into it to make an impression. Because we're going to be pressing these buttons and putting the mylar on, the thicker the layer of glue, the thicker the inclusions, or the thicker the layer of metal leaf, the more difficult it's going to be to press the button properly later. While I wait for the glue to dry on our experiment button, I'm going to start applying metal flake to a button shell. As you can see, the glue is clear, which means it's dry and ready for metal leaf. How you apply the flake is up to you. You can use the tweezer method as I am doing here. It's a bit tedious and time consuming, but you do have a little more control over your collar placement. I gently tap the leaf down to keep it from flying around. This metal flake is super light, and just my breath is enough to send it floating around the room. I am careful not to touch any of the glue with my tweezers, even though it is dried and stuck fast to the button. And quick side note, if you're going to be using metal leaf or any kind of fine, like glitter, anything like that, you should probably wear breathing protection because you really don't want to get this stuff in your lungs. Place metal flake or leaf onto the button shell until it's well covered. You don't have to cover every tiny bit. As you can see, the flake breaks up and spreads out over the button as it's brushed. I still have some bare spots, so I'm using a method of dipping my brush into the jar and tapping out some flake on the button. I use another button to pick up some of the excess leaf from the first button. Then I dab the paper with it to pick up some of the small pieces onto the button. If you do this, make sure your surface is clean, otherwise you can pick up dust, dirt, hair, whatever onto your button. I use the brush to rub or burnish the metal flake onto the button. I hold it over the second button so that it'll catch some of the bits that are brushed off. I use a circular motion with light pressure to burnish the metal flake. As oils from your skin can cause the metal leaf to tarnish, gloves might be a good choice here, but I wash my hands well before applying the leaf and I haven't had any problems yet. I also try not to handle the surface too much, even though you'll see my thumb making contact frequently. For these buttons, I'm going to apply some gold, copper, and silver flake. The process is basically the same. Apply the leaf, brush, burnish, rinse, and repeat. However, I do want to add that I usually use the small paintbrush first to press the flake down. I also use it to pick up or lift away excess pieces of flake or pieces that are folded over. I find a brush like this with stiffer bristles works well for this task. I pick up some of the blue and purple flake from before. I sometimes like to add a little collar to the copper and gold buttons. There really is no right or wrong when it comes to the collars, just use whatever you have or what you like. Button kits are a fairly inexpensive way to experiment with different collars of leaf. So I forgot to hit record when I started applying leaf to our embossed gear button. I'm using some copper and silver leaf sheets for this. I also use some of the gold flakes to complete the look I'm going for. The application is pretty straightforward. I use my tweezers to pull off some of the leaf and lay it on the button. After I cover the button, I brush and burnish the leaf. Success! As you can see, the designs became a little distorted because the inclusions slid around as I placed and removed them from the button. But the method seems sound. It actually telegraphed through the flake better than I had originally expected. This next step is completely optional. You can leave the buttons as they are with just a metal flake and press them, but I like to add words and phrases to mine. I picked up this typewriter last year at a vendor mall. I think I paid maybe $18 for it. It works pretty well considering it's 70 or 80 years old. It's definitely a different experience typing on this compared to more modern typewriter or a computer keyboard. I have to use the hunt and peck method since I am sitting behind my camera tripod. I hope you enjoy the sound of typing as much as I do. Once I am done typing, I cut out my words and phrases using a paper cutter and a pair of scissors. Next time I really need to remember to use double line spacing, as these are pretty close together. This next step is also completely optional. I like to add ransom note style words and phrases to my buttons as well. There are no rules here. Simply flip through a magazine or other type of periodical and cut out what you like. You could use old comic books, maps, atlases, pretty much anything printed on paper. I get my magazines for free from my grandmother, as she has dozens that she wants rid of. And here I'm just playing around with the placement of my letters. I try to use a variety of colors. I also like to add these red heart sequins to some of my buttons as well. I think I got these at the dollar store. They're very thin, which is what you want. I like to use just a regular old glue stick to glue down my letters and embellishments. You don't need a super strong glue for this, as the mylar will hold everything in place when the button is pressed. The only reason for gluing everything down is to keep it from falling off or sliding off the button as it's moved and pressed. The process is pretty straightforward, if not tedious. It can be finicky to get the pieces covered with glue, but with some patience, the work is eventually completed. Sorry, I didn't realize that I was doing so much of this out of frame, but the process is the same for typed words. Cover the back with glue and apply them to the button. I use a micro brush to apply glue to areas that are lifting or not sticking down, and then I just kind of press it with my tweezers to make sure they stick down flat. The next and final step is to press the button. I place the button shell into the first die, face up. I add a mylar and I slide the die carriage to the right. I then place the pin back into the second die. Just a quick note, if the button shell doesn't fall into the die properly, don't force it. You may need to scrape off some of the excess glue or metal leaf from the edges for it to fit properly. The die on my machine is a bit on the loose side, so I usually don't have to clean up the edges too often. Press the button and voila! Your button is now finished. Quick side note, even though the words and inclusions are very thin, you will still probably feel them through the mylar. This is normal as the mylar presses in very tightly around the button, but I've not had any come undone or tear through the mylar. But I do always check the back to make sure I have a good even crimp. If you don't have a good crimp all the way around your button, you may have made your button too thick, as it were. It may also be that your machine just isn't compatible with this method, or your button kits are low quality. It's always best to test first before committing to making a bunch of buttons off the bat. If you watch this till the end, you deserve to give yourself a pat on the back. And please leave a comment if you are going to use this method, or maybe it gave you an idea for something else. If you like this tutorial but don't have a button machine or don't want to make buttons, I do sell these in my Shopify store, longwellcraftworks.com. I'll leave a link to that in the description below, as well as a link to where I get my button supplies. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video, and I hope you have a wonderful day. See you again soon.